How do you feel about the current government's focus on, or at least to me, it seems like the focus has been more on single ingredients, at least what's reported in the media, things like Red 40 and seed oils. Is that where you would, if you were part of the government that was given the task of trying to improve the average diet in America, increase adherence to this healthy eating index, change the food environment, is that where you would be focusing your time and energy, or is that a distraction from what you think matters most?
The latter. Yeah, I think it's a distraction. I think, any single die is just part of a larger problem of too much frankenfood, too much chemistry where real food ought to be. Seed oils are a complete boondoggle. Canola oil is one of the healthiest choices you can make. It depends obviously on how the oil is produced. So there's a difference between mechanically pressed and chemically extracted, organic versus not, and there are different versions of these things. But the evidence is overwhelming of the advantages there. And other seed oils are probably better than the oils they're replacing. But at a certain level of nuance, I would agree that we get too much omega-6 fat, not enough omega-3 fat. Oils in processed foods are part of that problem. So, yeah, there's an issue there, but it's being overblown. And frankly, replacing seed oil with beef tallow is a tremendous mistake. It's an environmental mistake. It's a human health mistake. It's taking the situation into far worse territory. So, yeah, it's definitely not where my focus would be. My focus would be exactly where my focus is. If we could do just one thing to improve diet quality in America, I would say let's make everybody vividly aware of what their diet quality is and what it could be. And let's put that information in front of every healthcare professional. How would that reverberate? So I've written a thought experiment on this. There was a time before the invention of the blood pressure cuff when the House of Medicine already knew how important blood pressure was. We knew that it was a major contributor to heart attack and stroke, but we had no convenient way of measuring it. We could measure it with intra-arterial catheters, which are quite painful. So, they were only used in extreme circumstances. And by the way, we still use them in extreme circumstances. Now I've put them in over the course of my career. But we had no convenient way of measuring blood pressure, so we didn't. We just knew that in general it's a problem, and if your blood pressure is high, you're at increased risk of heart attack or stroke. So how did we know that your blood pressure was high? We waited until you had a heart attack or stroke because we couldn't measure it beforehand. So when you had your first stroke, we said, I bet your blood pressure is not so good. And maybe then we put in an intra-arterial catheter when you were in the hospital. The advent of sphygmomanometry, the non-invasive measurement of blood pressure with a blood pressure cuff, was a massive transformation in everything about medicine. Prevailing clinical practice, medical education, qualifications, credential, everything. Because we suddenly had this critically important upstream information and we had to be able to deal with it. So if physicians had not formerly been trained in how to respond to blood pressure numbers, they had to learn. And if medical education didn't address the critical importance of measuring systolic and diastolic blood pressure, they had to change medical education. And if population level health programs were not being credentialed based on how routinely they measured and managed blood pressure, that had to change, and everything did change. It was absolutely transformational, and none of us can imagine a world now where blood pressure isn't routinely measured. We're all used to having it done. It's just a fixture. Well, where we were before the invention of the blood pressure cuff is where we are with regard to diet. Diet quality measured objectively, take us back to the very beginning of our conversation, is the single leading predictor variable for premature death from all causes in the United States today. And it's measured in just about nobody. So we know that diet quality is a problem in general at the population level, just like we knew about blood pressure before the blood pressure cuff, but we don't measure it in anybody. And the way we know that your diet's broken is you develop obesity or type 2 diabetes or hypertension or dyslipidemia or all of the above. Just exactly the way the world was with blood pressure before the blood pressure cuff was invented. So this phase of my career took me from academic medicine to being an accidental entrepreneur because I invented a new way to assess diet. We can do it in 60 seconds. It's effortless. It's painless. It's even fun. It's over any digital interface. We don't need body specimens of any kind. You just play this game, and we've got your diet in about 60 seconds, and we can generate a measure, the objective measure of your diet quality. So it's as easy to do as a blood pressure. So my argument is diet quality should be a vital sign. And what I would argue this administration can and should do is, if you're really serious about making Americans healthier again, or for the first time, and you want a preferential focus on diet, let's make diet quality objectively measured, not ideological, but just, whatever your kind of diet you have, we're going to measure using the best metric we've got. Let's make that universal as blood pressure. Let's get that in front of every person. So as a patient, we all know our diet quality the way we know our blood pressure and maybe our BMI and maybe our cholesterol, and in front of every healthcare professional. And then let's require that the healthcare professionals deal with this. If you can't deal with it yourself, make an appropriate referral. If you aren't educated in this area, get educated. We're going to start elevating the standard of clinical care so that every health professional has to be able to deal with this, because for health professionals not to be able to deal with the single leading predictor variable for all-cause mortality really seems like a pretty serious dereliction of duty, doesn't it? So it's time to adapt or die. So that's the change I would make. That change can be made. I think that would be transformational. And by the way, that would get at all these other subsidiary issues. So, the quality of fats in your diet figure in the score that you get for your overall diet quality. If you're eating more processed foods with artificial dyes and probably also bringing along for the ride excess sodium and sugar, that shows up in your diet quality. So if you fix the big picture, you fix the components of the big picture. If you fixate on some component, it's the famous case of, being diverted by the trees and not seeing the forest. So I would argue that the whole forest here is burning down, and we could focus attention on that by making diet quality a vital sign and an actionable cue to every patient and every healthcare professional.
Do you think and that sounds like an incredible tool and very empowering for an individual, do you think that would need to be paired with things that change the food environment, or do you think we have enough willpower to make healthy choices given the right information, despite an environment that is seducing us at literally every corner?
It's a great question, Simon. I'd say, in a sense, a little bit of both. Not so much because of willpower, but so what I'm talking about, for those who want to know more about it, the company I founded is called Diet ID, and you can learn more about this at dietid.com. So in our diet map, we don't recommend to you a diet that you're not interested in. So we can assess your baseline diet, but you're talking about dietary change. So how do we deal with that? Well, we have a multicultural diet map. And we ask you two questions as we help you find a personalized goal diet. The first is, what does you want diet to do for you? Do you want to lower your blood pressure? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to improve your immunity? Do you want to address the health of your microbiome? Do you want to retain your cognition? Do you want to optimize a pregnancy outcome? Do you want to manage symptoms of menopause? Click all that. Do you want to maximize athletic performance? And if so, is it stamina or strength or recovery? Click all that pertain. How can we deal with all these things? Well, because there's a preponderance of peer-reviewed evidence on all these topics that link different dietary patterns in foods and components of foods to these different outcomes. So we use the preponderance of peer-reviewed evidence as a filter. We built algorithms that say, whatever box you click, we will run through that filter the diets that line up against this objective. So you click however many you want, and we then show you, here are the 7 diets that best line up against this combination of objectives you have, right? We're not telling you how to eat. You're telling us what you want diet to do. Here are the diets that do that best. And we then show you all of those in an image you can look at and ask you, of these, which looks appealing? And you pick. And if you started out with an ethnic diet, so you're Cuban American or Mexican American or Vietnamese American, and you brought with you the traditions from your native land, we show you that version of it. Here's an optimized version of a Vietnamese American diet, so that if that matters to you, you don't have to opt out of your native cuisine. We've just helped you optimize it and choose the best from it so you can love food that loves you back. So you asked a question about willpower or food environment. I'd say there's much less willpower involved when you're being invited to love food that loves you back than when you're being told, hey, no matter what you like to eat, you have to eat this way, right? So we don't do that. We use this same objective measure of diet quality across this wide array of dietary choices in the service of helping people love food that loves them back. And yes, we should change the food environment because there are many obstacles. I mean, obviously, there are people who live in food swamps and food deserts and people who have food insecurity and people who can't afford this. We should combine with this awareness of how to improve diet in a lane that you actually want to be in. We should combine that with behavioral economics. So there should be financial incentives to choose more nutritious foods and move in the direction that would be good for your health. Because, the economics of business as usual are absolutely terrible. We make horrible food inexpensive, resulting in horrible health that's massively expensive. And we could incentivize the selection of highly nutritious food and curtail the expenses on the healthcare side. So all we have to do is align the perspectives so that, the money that's supporting good food choices is coming from the bucket that winds up paying for healthcare expenditure, right? So the government can do that. Government is subsidizing SNAP and other assistance programs in the food space, and obviously plays a major role in what food gets produced via the USDA and agricultural policy and the Farm Bill. And the government is also responsible for Medicare and Medicaid and, massive amount of healthcare expenditure. So spend a little more at the front end for, helping people get to better food, save a ton of money at the back end. And so I think we should do both. I think we can change the food environment. I think ultimately we shift food production. I think we can educate people to make better choices. But I don't think we should lean too hard on willpower. We don't really have to. I think we can lead people in a direction they actually want to go. And we coined the term behavioral navigation. Historically, when you talk about changing behavior, it's either behavior change or behavior modification, which is here we are in our lab coats, you're broken, we're going to fix you. And, that's just not terribly appealing. Navigation is GPS. It's not telling you where to go. You tell it where you want to go. It just helps you get there by giving you a turn list. We're doing that for food choice. And I think if you approach it that way, there's much less willpower involved.
Everything that you said there about making healthy, nutritious foods more available, the effect that that has on chronic disease and the costs of healthcare associated with chronic disease are things that on paper seem to be very common sense kind of oriented. And I think there'll be a lot of people listening who are in dismay or perhaps a little bit pessimistic about a future where a government actually does what is required to make those changes because of the corporate interests that you spoke to before. Are you optimistic that a government can actually make changes to the food environment such that the convenient, easy, simple choice is healthy, nutritious food as opposed to these ultra processed, quote unquote junk foods that you mentioned earlier, where there are these huge corporate multinational companies, doing everything they can, fighting tooth and nail to make sure that the status quo, remains as it is today.
Yeah, I don't know. I have not been hopeful. I've been doing what I do for the better part of 40 years and waiting to see progress we haven't made. This administration has been particularly adamant about their willingness to make change in that area. On the other hand, this is a radically anti-regulatory administration. So the idea that it's going to be the first administration ever to effectively regulate the food industry when it's generally anti-regulatory and far more regulation inclined administrations have failed to regulate food industry seems a bit far-fetched to me. So I'm waiting to see what happens. But I've always argued that as much as I'd like to see effective policy change, the single best way to modify the food supply is to modify the food demand. We know that works. We've seen it work. We've had natural experiments. We've had fad diets that have just caught fire, like the Atkins diet in the early 2000s. And tens of millions of people are suddenly all trying this diet. and the kind of food it requires is not readily available, and the food production side jumps through hoops to make that food available. So there were no low-carb foods in American supermarkets before the Atkins diet caught fire, and within 12 weeks of that hitting the New York Times bestseller list, there were some in every supermarket in America, and within just a little bit longer than that, there were lots. That was a direct response to consumer demand. Now, I'm not saying it was a good thing because it was mostly low-carb junk food that was being peddled, but I'm just saying we have a power we tend not to exercise or even recognize. The food demand overwhelms the food supply. The food supply is subordinate and responsive to the food demand. So if we could do enough to raise awareness about the difference between good food and junk food and have people express their desire for the former at every cash register, the food industry would reform itself without the need for government intercession. So I'd like to see a bit of both. I'd like the policymakers to do what they can do. I'd like to see us get better at empowering the individual consumer with actionable information, like knowing what their diet quality is, what their diet quality could be, and the advantages of it, and what the difference is, and how to get there from here. We can do that. We can share all that information by moving electrons around. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not holding my breath.
I recently ran my full labs through Function Health, and I have to say the results were eye-opening. Turns out my ApoB was higher than ideal, probably thanks to a little too much coconut yogurt. I also found out I was slightly low in copper, something that I would have never suspected without testing. On the flip side, my biological age came back 13.3 years younger than my actual age, a calculation based on the work of aging researcher Dr. Morgan Levine. So all in all, I've got a few tweaks to make to optimize my lipids and nutrient status, but overall my blood work says I'm doing pretty well. That's what I love about Function. You get access to over 160 biomarkers covering everything from hormones and inflammation to nutrients, toxins, cardiovascular risk, and more. And all your results are housed in one beautiful platform, all tracked over time. Once you get your results, you can make informed changes before small issues become big ones. To get started, head to functionhealth.com/Simon Hill. The first 1,000 people get a $100 credit toward their membership. That's functionhealth.com/Simon Hill.